propagate plants by seed or cuttings, or by a number of other methods, we're going to use some sort of propagating media in which to sow the seed, or to strike the cuttings, or to plant the plant up into. Now, the basis for most propagation media is a sand, or certainly for propagation media for striking cuttings in, but there are other alternatives that I'll talk about. This is a sharp sand, or a coarse sand. You can get granitic sand, you can get quartz-based sands, you can get various sands, and they differ from place to place, but you can see the particles in those sands are quite large. There's also a fair amount of fine particle in it, but that's going to drain extremely well. Now, if we take 3 parts of that sand, that type of sand, and we add it to 1 part of peat moss, now that's peat moss, we'll get a standard sort of propagation mix. And that's going to be the sort of thing that you would use for sowing most seeds in or growing most cuttings in. So let's do that and just see what we come up with and what it looks like. 1, 2, 3, I'll put 4, 5. And I had a handful in before, so that's 6 handfuls of that. I had 1 handful of peat in. I'll put another handful of peat in. You can see when you don't need to be that precise about your proportions. You can do it like that. You end up with a mix like that. Now that's a standard sort of propagation mix. If we take that, we put it in a pot, tube or whatever, and we immerse that in a bucket of water. You take your bucket, fill it with water, and you immerse that in there and leave it there until all of the air bubbles rise out of it, and then take it out and let it drain off. You can then put a cutting in that, and you can strike your cutting like that. If you want to get a tray such as I've got there, and you fill that up with a propagating mix like that, you can sow your seeds straight in there. And that's quite a common way of propagating plants. But there are other media that you can use. Now, vermiculite is a medium which is used it's actually a type of insulation material. It's a spongy material that comes from the mining industry, processed material. That holds water like a sponge, and that can be used to propagate plants too. But you won't use vermiculite straight. If you have more than about 30 or 40% of vermiculite mixed with anything, the vermiculite just loses its structure. I could fill the whole of this container up, water it, and a month later it would only be half full, because these little spongy bits would just collapse. They would compact. But if you mix vermiculite with coarse sand, say 1 part vermiculite to 2 parts coarse sand, you can get a medium that'll do the same sort of thing as peat and sand. Or there's another material that you can use, perlite. Now that comes from the mining industry too. That absorbs water, that holds moisture, the same as vermiculite. Vermiculite and perlite, neither of them have any nutrients that are going to contribute to the plant's growth, but that's not necessary really in plant propagation. Now, some people propagate just using straight perlite. They would take a pot and fill it with straight perlite, water it, and put your cuttings straight in that. And there are a lot of plants you can grow in straight perlite. Some people might use 50% perlite and 50% coarse sand. So let's half empty the pot, half fill it with coarse sand. We'll mix that up a little bit, throw it in the bucket and mix it up if we want, and then pour it back into the pot. Get something like that. You could use that. So you can see there's lots of different options. Another option is to use rock wool. Now, rock wool is an interesting material. You can see that's a very spongy material. See how it's divided underneath into blocks. What happens is you sow your seed, or you put your cutting in the top of the rock wool. You wet it first, any of these media you always wet before you use, and you put your cuttings in. As the roots grow, you can just break each block off. But I'll show you what rock wool's like. See, it looks a fairly solid sort of block. Look how it compacts down. In fact, that solid block is about more than 90% airspace. That leaves a lot of room for water to be held inside it, and it also leaves a lot of room for air to be held inside it. So if you put a cutting or a seed in that, the roots of the cutting and seed are insulated by this material against temperature fluctuations outside. The material holds heaps of water, so the root doesn't dry out, but it also holds heaps of air, so the root doesn't sit in pure water and it's not as susceptible to root rots. Rock wool can work extremely well for propagating a lot of different plants. The only problem, I suppose, with rock wool is it's not all that easy to get a hold of, and it maybe is a little more expensive to buy. But then it's cheaper to handle, and studies have been done by commercial nurseries where they've looked at the cost of producing a cutting grown plant in rock wool compared to a cost of producing one in a tube like that. And in fact the rock wool comes out very comparable, about the same cost, maybe sometimes even cheaper. If you want to buy rock wool, you can usually get it from hydroponic shops, because it is used quite extensively in the hydroponics industry. So look up in the telephone book under H for hydroponics and ask them for rock wool, and you may be able to find it there. You also get other little products cropping up from time to time. Here's one which appeared recently. This is actually straw that's been compressed into a block. Now this can be used two ways. It can be used just as a mulch in the garden, add water, it all swells up, and it provides a mulch for your garden beds. But the other way is in propagation. You can actually add water to this, make it all nice and soft, and poke a seed in the top and just put it away somewhere, and the seed will germinate and grow amongst that block, and then you can just lift it up and take it off and transplant it wherever you want to grow it. So that's just another different sort of medium. Another medium that is used sometimes is Spagna Moss. Now Spagna Moss, actually you can see there's a bit of green there, that's still alive. That's just a type of moss, and that holds moisture very, very well, but it will drain too. For plants that like lots of moisture, say something like ferns, you can fill a tray with Spagna Moss and sprinkle fern spore over the top, and the fern spore could germinate in that. Peat moss could be used the same way though. Some nurseries use just a pot or a tray filled with your peat moss, nice and wet. Wet it all down, saturate it first, and then propagate their fern spore into that. Spagna moss is also used for aerial layering, and aerial layering is a technique which is a pretty to grow. It can't be used on everything, but it's a nifty little propagation technique to use for some things. We'll show you how to do that a little bit later in this tape. That's aerial layering.